Hey everyone. I think this is the first time I've ever sort of turned up on my own without any guests, and today I thought I'll take my chances and introduce a couple of topics that I've been thinking about of late. And they seem to be sort of kind of not related at all. We're talking about consciousness and and morality. And for the first instance, you wouldn't think they'll be connected, but somehow I think I found a connection. And whatever I'm going to be talking about in these couple of episodes coming today's and next week, I've decided to have them in two parts because they're quite involved, and I thought it would be quite injustice to cover a couple of indulgent, heavy two topics in one session. I'm going to have two parts. I'm going to have part one today covering morality, and next week I'm going to cover consciousness. And the reason why I want to talk about them together is because I found a reason to think they are interconnected. First of all, I'm just going to quickly say hello to the people who turn up today to hear me rant in English. Hey Ziad, how are you? Hello Yar Al Iraqi. Hey Brendan. Hey M Samak, great to see you, mate. Um, I haven't watched the movie, but hopefully it is somewhat related to what we're going to be talking about today. Interested to hear your views later on. So these two topics, morality and consciousness, were part of the five gaps that I've presented before, as where the God of the gap sort of reside at the moment. We've got three other issues, but two of them were around the hard problem of consciousness, or so has been dubbed by uh, 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 I can't remember now his name, for some reason skipped my head, but he's an Australian philosopher, David Chalmers. David Chalmers, who has coined the problem of consciousness as a hard one, the hard problem of consciousness. Lots of people disagree with him, including Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett does not believe that the problem of consciousness is that hard. Yes, it's a for the first instant is a bit problematic, but it's not hard one at all, and he can sort of explain it away in such an elegant way. I kind of like Daniel Dennett's rendition of that particular explanation. But today I'm going to propose something that's slightly different. But we're first going to tackle morality. Um, Consciousness is quite an interesting one because it is the one that is, according to many claims, it is unexplained. And it's one of those things that you're sort of, we all understand and feel what is consciousness. It is this moment. It's what we all sort of conceive every single thinking moment where you're reflecting on your thoughts and those around you and your surroundings. That's consciousness. But when it's time to explain it and to understand it and explain why it exists, we kind of find it very difficult to articulate ourselves. It's an interesting one. So I'm going to leave that to part two. Uh, the one thing in common, and I managed to find the commonality between consciousness and morality. It's interestingly, I think it is to do with food. I think the search for energy, ultimately, that's what food is. We call it food, and we sort of celebrate the colors and the cuisines and the different flavors. But at the end of the day, we're trying to mask the harsh fact that it's just fuel. It is fuel for energy. And it is sophisticated now because the way we approach it, um, uh, it is, to me, when it's stripped down to the reality of it, it's fuel. Um, and it seems that harsh reality of the search for food and energy has sort of formed and pushed um, our evolution in multiple directions. And I believe morality is one of them. I'm going to propose something slightly different, which is maybe more of a story, um, and how morality has sort of evolved. The monopoly at the moment is for religion to claim that all morality has started with religion. Some would deem it to be so. Some more sophisticated theists would say, no, 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 we understand morality is pre-existed religion, but religion sort of anchoring it, putting in the right path, and even the pre-existence of morality within humanity, it's the evidence for the stamp of God, or the fingerprint of God in the human design. It's we're all sort of have the blueprint of morality in our hearts and in our brains, which is quite interesting. This is quite, unfalsifiable claim. You can't really, because the entity that you're claiming is invisible to start with, so it's very difficult to prove or disprove that notion. But what we can see from probing history, that morality has evolved, and it's still evolving and it's changing. And that's the nature of morality. I think it's changing. It cannot be um, um, absolute, which is not to call it objective, because there always a conflation between the two terms, absolute and objective morality. I think by objective here, it's conflated with so many terms, and objective here sometimes it means, or it's meant to mean, that it's coming from up above, which is the divine command theory, which will make it quite arbitrary. Because if morality has been commanded from up high above, it won't be morality to start with. It'd be called fulfilling orders or something like that. So it's very difficult, because all what it takes is another instruction from high above, and what seems to be immoral in the past, it can be immoral today because the author of morality has deemed it to be so. So I would discount divine command theory as a proper source of morality. It is a morality of some sort, because it does govern people's behavior, and that's the definition of morality. But whether it's good morality or not, whether it's good for the group, whether it's good for the individual, that is something to be judged, and usually it is subjective judgment at the end of the day. Well, we're going to start with something very basic and very simple. We first have to agree on the terms, and we're going to start defining what is morality, what is a moral act, and why do we have that intuition? If we somebody who's called on the street, and they seem to be homeless, that we immediately feel sorry, or most of us who feel empathy would feel sorry, and we kind of have an urge to help them if we can. Providing a jacket, some worms, some food, give him some money, that sort of thing. Why do we do that? Why we are compelled to help others, and just not, they're not family members, they're not somebody that we know, but we feel somehow their pain, and we want to help. So we are going to define morality in very simple terms. It's a cost incurred to benefit someone else other than yourself, and that cost can be anything from time spent, energy, simple tasks like you're on a flight and you're helping an elderly lady to lift her bag into the storage cabin up above. Something very simple, just like that. And that's a moral act, because you're incurring a cost. You spend something, which is money, energy, time, whatever you want to call it, but you're spending something, you incur a cost to benefit somebody else other than you, sometime at absolutely nothing in return. or even if it involves something in return. But you're doing it so. Um, so this is the case. What has happened in our evolution to urge us to do such acts? And some of these acts can end up being quite altruistic. You can actually end up risking your own life to save some complete stranger. Why do we do these strange things? And you think if we display that sort of behavior, we shouldn't be here. That overly altruistic behavior might be, not really aiding the natural selection, survival of the fittest, survival uh, of the strongest, which has never been uttered by Charles Darwin, but it's in the Arab world. It's one of those phrases that keeps getting repeated. It's never been part of the theory or never been uttered by Charles Darwin. There's got to be an explanation. And has it always been with us like that? And I think the answer is in a search for the evolution of all species before humanity, way before humanity, because we are about 250, 300,000 years old. But we understand that morality must have existed beforehand, or at least had precursors. It couldn't just appear out of the sun. Nothing appeared out of the sudden like that. We understand that evolution is a very slow process of thousands and thousands of little steps built upon each other to end up in an emergent property that's never seen before and never stops. You keep building upon that. So what's happened in the past? My understanding and my opinion at the moment, it's around the search for energy, search for food. And the same will be for consciousness and the emergence of consciousness. Ultimately, it's the search for energy. We're talking about in the biogenesis where inanimate become animate. And that's a different story. So we're going to skip that part because that's needed a sort of an episode on its own. So I don't want to be bogged down with, oh, how did it happen? That's an biogenesis episode. We'll tackle that later. But we understand that at some point, animate, bioorganic organism has appeared on Earth. And we're talking about 4 billion years ago, almost. And these single cellular organisms have stayed with us for quite some time. They evolve into multicellular organism, and the nervous system and the precursor of the brain start to emerge. And then we end up at some point with the reptilian life form. The reptilian life form had a nervous system and a small brain, and what we call the ancient brain, which is still with us today. It's the first bit of the brain that is evolved because the brain has 3 parts, and that is the ancient. It's called the ancient brain or the reptilian brain. And it's quite a basic one, and a basic nervous system. And that nervous system is designed for one reason. And when I say designed here, it's not designed by a designer, but it's sort of curved through natural selection in a very slow process for animals to adapt and suit their environment and pass on their genes. So at some point in our evolution, the emergence of mammals or warm-blooded animals in particular has emerged about 200 to 220 million years ago. And that was a significant time in the history of biology and evolution. It's going to give rise to us eventually. What has happened here is we've had animal organism that is sort of content to survive and have a nervous system that would support itself. The passing of the genes and to the offsprings was done sort of mechanically. So imagine a turtle laying eggs on a beach somewhere, and leaving behind 200 or 300 eggs. And there's absolutely no care factor between the mother turtle and the rest of the baby turtles. They're left to fend for themselves. And they do so quickly because they will have a chance, maybe a window of 20 to 30 seconds to make it to the water before they get picked up by iguanas and hawks and seagulls and ocean gulls and things like that. So what's happening here? There is no bond between mother and offspring. And notice one thing here: the offspring, being a reptilian, a turtle, would learn a lot of things in very, very short period of time. And that's what it would all need to know and to learn for probably for the rest of its life. It will learn probably within the next half an hour how to run, how to swim, how to eat. And these skills will stay forever. So not much really of a learning curve for reptilians. Reptilians are also cold-blooded. That means they cannot regulate their heat and temperature unless there's an energy source like the sun. So that's why they feed throughout the day. And then the lizard world as well, that's what they do at night. They kind of go into hibernation, or they're into hiding, they're burrowing, they're keeping the heat so they can keep the body warm. And sometime in our evolution, some of these organisms mutated and developed a warm-blooded, or called, I think, homeotherm is the term. And these hot-blooded animals, or warm-blooded animals, can, for the first time, forage at night. They can actually feed. They can feast at night. This is huge. For the first time, animals, because you're no longer dependent on the energy of the sun to regulate your body heat, you will actually depend on something else, which is burning of calories. You're going to eat more. But in exchange, because that's what evolution is all about, it's all trade-offs. You're going to get something, you're going to pay for it somehow in return. And in return for being able to have that open buffet in the evening and eat all day whenever you want, is you, pound for pound, a mammal will have to eat 10 times more than of a reptile to regulate the body heat through energy. And obviously through the eating. And that's huge ecological pressure to find food that is 10 times the amount of that of a reptilian. So what would happen here? What will be the response from nature here? Obviously, make animals smarter. That could be one of the solutions. What does it mean? It means more neurons being created in the brain. The brain is getting bigger, like it's always had. More neurons, more connections. So smarter animals can find food easier, problem solving, that sort of thing. The cost of that is quite huge. So what would you do? Especially when we're talking about neurons that are mature from the word go. That is a huge cost to pay straight away. How about that? How about creating a lot of neurons? But these neurons are not mature enough. They'll have a certain time in the growth of the animal to start maturing and to start functioning and responding to the ecological and the environmental pressure to create synapses that will have learning that is going to expand beyond the first 5 or 10 minutes of the animal's life. They'll learn a lot more skills. They'll be a lot more intelligent. But to reduce the cost, have the animal born immaturely, and these neurons will mature only after a certain period of time. So what does it mean? It means for the first time ever, the mother, particularly the mother, so sometimes it's the father, but it's very rare occasions, but it's always the mother, for the first time, have to care for her offspring. And this is the first time the nervous system has been redesigned and re-engineered, not just to look after oneself, but to look after yourself as well as your offsprings. So your offspring and yourself are supported by that nervous system. For the first time, you're caring about something or someone else other than yourself. And with that comes a host of chemicals and drugs in the brain to promote that. There are drugs in the brain to promote pleasure and pain principles, where they can be turned on and turned off to promote social behavior or to promote certain attitude that is going to be beneficial to the survival of the species. So the mother looks after the offspring, and you notice there's a bit of a shift here. Instead of having to hatch 200 or 300 eggs like in a turtle, we're talking about a certain number of litter, not many. So the mother can look after the offspring. And those chemicals flowing in, activating the pleasure and pain principles, and we're talking about the opiates in the brain, in particular the oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical that is going to be released to anchor the bond between mother and offspring. And it flows both ways. I'm going to show you a picture of interesting animal. Was being studied to understand why do we feel good when we are in love. This cute little thing, it's called the prairie vole. The prairie vole is an interesting sort of rodent that is monogamous. They actually practice monogamy. They mate for life, and they have a certain neurological connections that will compel them to find a partner and mate with them for life. And these connections can vary from one species to another and one group of animals to another. Like, for example, baboons have the neurological connection to care more for the group. So it's more group oriented. More group oriented rather than just partner oriented. Some are more partner oriented, like the prairie vole, like just showing you. And these neurological arrangements, they can take different forms to achieve different social behaviors. Now, once has this been picked up, and for the first time ever, the nervous system is geared to look after yourself and someone else other than yourself. And with the increase of the size of the brain and the prefrontal lobe cortex emerging, and the emergence of empathy, and emergence of groups, and the way you should act within a group, we can see now how the precursor of morality, and that's exactly what you need. Didn't we define morality to start with as this simple act of incurring a cost to yourself so you can help someone else? So it was achieved here in about 200 million years ago through this first step to move away from being cold-blooded to become warm-blooded, so you can eat more, or you can have more better access to food, eating day and night. Um, obviously, I'm going to try to take some questions, but they be quite interesting. They are more relevant to the conversation. So if, if the questions are going to be completely sort of outside of the topic, I would sort of have to um, not address them at this point. So more or less, it's become inbuilt in us, right? Yes, I think it is true that it's kind of inbuilt at this point because we've evolved and we're gonna keep traits. If a trait has helped us evolve and have helped certain animal to pass on its gene, the offspring will contain that trait that helped us continue to survive in the first place, and it will be kept being passed on to the next generation. I'm not sure I understand the question. What do you mean by 75% sure? And age of the universe is unfortunately nothing to do with what we're talking about today, Jojo. So I am going to posit that the search for food and energy has led um, animals to become warm-blooded, um, and in the process, it has helped animals to, for the first time, to evolve a nervous system and a brain that will look after other beings other than themselves, and therefore it's the precursor of morality. It gets more complex as time goes by because we're talking about now more social animals, group pressures, ecological pressures, animals hierarchy. This is all before humanity here. We're talking about almost 200 million years ago of evolution. So imagine morality evolving over 200 million years and getting refined and getting more sophisticated and more complex with every complication that gets added into the system, to eventually being passed on to humanity some 300,000 years ago with even more complex social systems. The introduction of language, because with language you can articulate more complex ideas. You can understand the future. You can understand the repercussions of an act. You can empathize or read what your enemy is going to do next. All of that has added to the complexity of morality. But to come and claim that morality has evolved or has been given to us from up high and from a divine being, first of all, we'll make it completely arbitrary based on the whims of that super entity, which will make it redundant. Or we can sort of trace it the way we are doing right now, which is tracing it to the very humble beginnings of it, which is, in my opinion, is the search for food. Why are we the only sapient race on Earth? So sapient is not a race; it's species. It's not a race. Is actually not a scientific word at all. There is no such thing as race in biology. There were uh, other homos in existence at the same time. We're the only Homo sapien, but there were other Homo species together, like the Homo neanderthalensis, which is of the same species because we were able to interbreed with them. We know that we share about 2% of the DNA, especially the Europeans with the Neanderthal. So um, uh, they did exist, and they only sort of gone extinct about 30 to 40,000 years ago. So they were quite recently. We had other uh, uh, human species. We are sapien. We're the only sapien, which means a knowing or wise. Uh, why we are, because we don't need there is no genetic drift happening. So for speciation to work or to happen, you need something called a genetic drift and isolation. Humans, I don't think humans can no longer speciate because we don't live in isolation of each other. As a matter of fact, the intermarriages will make it impossible for this to happen. And the travel, international travel. The Homo sapiens are all over the earth, in every continent. We visit each other's countries, and it's only one species anyway. There is no such thing as other races, and the Asians and the Europeans that we're all we're identical DNA. We're all Homo sapiens, so we're the same species. Um, the difference in the look is just the adaptation of weather and climatic factors, but that's all. But we were exactly the same species, and the evidence of that is we can all interbreed. We will have offspring if we have sex, so that we are the same species. But we will we don't. The only way we can speciate or we can change into different species is if some of us will go to another planet. Let's say, what's the name of that moon where they're talking about Atlantis, or one of those hospitable areas that we can sort of go to at some point. And that particular human species would live in isolation of the current human species in a different environment. And for speciation happens probably over about maybe 1 to 2 million years, maybe five. You need to have that separation. You evolve differently, and this could happen at some point. Actually, this is the only way it could happen. But right on Earth, for speciation to happen to humans, I think it's quite impossible. In a recent Nature paper, scientists have identified 26 genes involved in genetic networks responsible for the evolution of human pro-social behavior and self-awareness. That's brilliant. There we go. So we actually can inherit social behavior. It's not just learned through mores and learning the habits and the ways of the elders. But it seems, and I think Steven Pinker has sort of pointed something out in the Tabula Rasa, that we are not a complete blank slate. We've got something in the coding that gets stored to help us push learnings that we've sort of adapted to over millions of years, and it makes complete sense. We are, at least we understand it in our genetic expressions, and that genetic codes are not set in stone. It's almost like the brain plasticity, where some genetic dispositions might be altered slightly based on the environment. Um, I'm not sure I understand the question. Well, are we going towards being good, as if there is an end to destiny? Uh, Being good has nothing to do with the end destiny. Being good is good for all of us. We've learned to be good because it's a behavior that will help you survive. It's a survival tool. It's not something suspended in the sky. If you are good to the people around you, they're going to be good to you most of the time. So if you're not going to try to hurt them, they're not going to hurt you in return, which means the group that is collaborative, cooperative, is going to survive for longer. So really, it does not need an outside explanation at all. There is no end destiny. All what it's doing, it's just keeping that group intact, so you can pass on your genes. That's all. Okay. So just to summarize, then, my proposition today is that morality has evolved from the search for food, energy. That's how it started. And this is part one. Part two, we're going to talk about consciousness. And I think consciousness has emerged because we were searching for food. And I will explain how in part two. Uh, Potentially, but we understand that the universe that we are in, because it could be the local, and we're now going away from the topic, but I'll address that anyway. Um, we understand the Big Bang shows that the universe had a beginning. Um, but is it the ultimate beginning? We don't know, because the singularity could have been one of the instances where lots of other things were happening at the same time. There might have been multiple singularities happening all around the meta universe. As a matter of fact, there is a very, very strong indication now that it might have not been the ultimate beginning. And there are lots of hypotheses that have been proposed to tell us that the singularity might have not been the ultimate beginning. So potentially, Einstein could have been right all along, because he said he believed in the steady state theory where the universe is fixed. He's wrong with that for sure, because even if it's eternal, it's not fixed. But maybe our local universe had a beginning. Maybe our universe is part of many other multiverse ensemble. And string theory has an indication that if string theory is true, then the multiverse is a byproduct, and therefore our universe is only nothing but a local bubble universe that get created and pop in and out of existence, just like virtual particles in quantum mechanics. But that's not true, Georgia. You won't live better if you lie or steal. You might temporarily gain an advantage, but what if you're caught stealing? You could lose 10%, 10 years of your life in prison. You try to be good because you're hoping people are good back to you. And if you live in a society or a group of people where everybody's doing exactly that, then it's a better for the group. If you start lying and stealing, first of all, you run the risk of being found out, which will harm you significantly. And if everybody does that in a group, that group will not survive. That's why when the Ten Commandments came and said, "Thou shalt not steal," and "Thou shalt not kill," um, I'm not sure what God was inventing here, because humanity knew that about that for like millennia before that. It wasn't breaking news. The reason why is very simple. If humanity survived upon killing each other and stealing from each other, it would have not survived. The Ten Commandments were revealed when kingdoms like Egypt were established, and they have like judicial systems and judges and courts and uh, art and stuff like that. Were like beyond that point already. Even Moses himself, when he killed an Egyptian, he ran away in fear. Why? Because he it was condemned in Egypt. So homicide was not uh, welcome. He didn't need God, or at least that Yahweh God, to tell him, "Oh, hold on a second. By the way, stealing is bad." Well, he kind of knew about that. So yeah, you won't live any better by lying or stealing. Oh well, they reckon the Ten Commandments is a rip off of the Hammurabi laws, which is possible, but I don't mind ideas coming merging together. They're very similar because people are a very similar culture, so they might have come up with the same idea, just like Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace coming up with evolution at the same time. By natural selection, mind you, the exact same mechanic. So there might be a coincidence, but neighboring cultures can come up with the same terms at the same time. Plagiarism could be there, but it might also be coincidental cultural emergence of the same ideas. Uh, but again, humanity knew all about that. I mean, even before the Hammurabi Code, they might have been written down for the first time, but humanity would have not advanced an inch if killing and stealing was the order of the day. They must have had some code of conduct. Two families separated by a river, and they're living in front of each other, and they might have to share the same resources. They must have had some sort of an agreement. Even that we're talking prior to language. Language is about 50 to 70,000 years old. What happened to Homo sapiens when they're 250 years old? There must have been some sort of signals. Animals do that. We know that animals collaborate and work with each other. There are little fish that follow sharks to clean their teeth. Birds that will enter the crocodile mouth with a full happy invitation. They pick the food from between the teeth of the crocodile, and the crocodile will never break the rule and try to eat them. We see that in nature. Well, I'm not sure what Brahman has to do with any. All the ideas I'm postulating today are not. They are void of any super entity. You don't need to be given permission to be good. I've just explained and showed that being good is just a tool or a mechanism to share resources among people in a way that does not punish others or make it difficult to share that particular resource. That's all. You don't need an entity from high above to tell you, don't lie, be good. You don't need that at all. It's completely, you can explain it away, understanding the dynamics between human groups and animal groups. So, do animals have gods? because they can act moral. So really, I don't think morality. I think, as a matter of fact, I think morality, if it gets explained um, uh, the divine command theory. An entity from up above will issue certain instructions for you to follow. That is not morality. It is not morality. That's the whim of an author. As I said before, if killing is made bad by that God, and we've seen it in the Old Testament, he's ordering the Israelites to slaughter the Amalekites. Suddenly, what is condemned to be an immoral act to do, it is completely moral at that point because it was commanded by God. And that's the problem with the divine command theory. It is good because God said so. There is a problem. It's a huge problem for everyone. And you take away, forget about the God. If it's done by a father or a leader or a president of a country, that is still a problem. That's not how good morals evolve through a conversation among people. We chat, we talk about things. That's why neuroscience will never solve the problem of morality. People waiting for neurology and neuroscience to come and give us the answer. No. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do things the same way. Neurology might give you some triggers, might give you some hints. But at the end of the day, we're going to be sitting down as human species, and we're going to sit down and agree what is moral and what is good for us to advance in humanity and do better tomorrow. That's the only way you can do it. Well, thank you, Constellation Pegasus, for such a generous super chat. Thank you so much. You're a wonderful person. Evidently, neutrinos were released before photons when the universe collapsed down. If we were able to capture and measure them like photons, that's a way to see the past, the cosmic microwave background. That will be a wonderful day. Yes, obviously, because there is a certain period of the universe. I think there is the CMB. It's about 300,000 years old, I think, and this is when the universe was still opaque. It was dark because it was the plasma, and we couldn't see beyond that point. On the cosmic microwave background, which was where I think discovered by coincidence, people fixing antennas and cleaning the antennas from the bird poo. That was the thing, and they've stumbled upon that sound that wouldn't go away, and they ended up being the cosmic microwave background that told us the story of the Big Bang and prove the Big Bang and give us sort of an accurate dating that we have right today. Did you know the static? If anyone here has an old TV, and back in the day when a channel sort of the broadcast is over, you get that sort of the white noise, the static. Would you believe 1% of that static is the residual microwave background? Maybe wrong. No, let's find out. CMBH. Yeah, I was right. 400,000 years ago. The CMB was 400,000 years ago. Just Googled it now, and it's right in front of me. Between 380 to 400, to be precise. Yes, as a matter of fact, there is a special type of hunting, which still happens today in Africa. It's a type of hunting where a group of hunters, they exhaust animals. They run after them for like kilometers. and animals don't have sweat glands, so they overhibernate. Um, they get exhausted, and they eventually sometimes collapse. And it's done through groups of people. So that's a very old way of hunting, and it still survives today to date in Africa. Um, so that's one way. So it looks like collaboration was the order of the day. We had to cooperate with one another just to survive. That's why I'm saying morality is a tool for survival. That's sort of the spiritual and the emotional stuff. It's been added on to give it that sort of the motivation that humanity is always seeking. The super ego can be satisfied with, the big picture, the bigger questions. But to me, it's a survival tool. That's quite plausible for sure. That is something that I come across, Samak, in my readings. The reason why Homo sapiens were a little bit more had the edge over the Neanderthals, where the Neanderthals were a bit sort of like on the introvert side. They were living in smaller groups, while the Homo sapiens lived in a bigger groups. So it seems that collaboration in bigger numbers, and we know that to date, that human collaboration in large numbers can achieve great things. Even though I think one of the other names of the Homo neanderthalensis was the Homo robustus. It comes from the word robust, like really thick. And they were thick and strong. They were shorter, but they were dense. They had dense bones. They were strong. Even had bigger brains than Homo sapiens. I think Homo sapiens at that time was about 1,500 cubic inch, and the Homo neanderthalensis were about 1,750. So they were more than 10% bigger than the Homo sapiens brain size. But it looks like the Homo sapiens had better collaboration in bigger numbers. That could be one of the reasons. But we know that we didn't kill them all the way. We must have interbred with them. Why? Because 2% of our DNA contains Neanderthalensis DNA. So we must have at least in some part. I think religion has started also. He's evolved also. There is an evolution story to religion. I think along with the morality that we talked about, which is the nervous system become complex enough for organisms to look after themselves and their offspring, then you end up with a social structure. And for the social structure, we're talking about small family groups, and that small family groups don't need they only need to communicate their internal code of conduct. But once the situation gets a lot more complex, and we're talking about multiple families and living in a village where there are complete strangers to you, live in the same area, and the evolution of a class called the shaman or the priests to be able to apply a code of conduct that will govern all these groups of people, especially when appearing to the invisible entity, which means that you will have to do so even though you are not being observed. That must have been powerful. I think that's the precursor of religion. Talking about the more like the magical era, the shaman era, the spiritual leader era. And I think that will lead eventually to religion. and it gets exploited. So what is done? Religion has not come up with morality. It is exploited morality for its benefit. It's taken something that is already there and manipulated it, and as usual, claimed it to be its own. Agree, Suzanne. Agree. No, giants did not exist, Jojo. There's no such thing as giants. No. And what's your definition? I mean, we're talking about people that maybe 7 feet, 8 feet. Yeah, okay, they exist to date. Um, but giants like 60 foot and stuff, that's never existed. That's never happened. That for a human being to be 60 or 100 foot, the amount of energy that particular uh, um, animal will need to produce and consume, it's not economical. Evolution would not come with such a retarded design. Dinosaurs were there for a reason. They were there for quite some time. They were quite successful, but they were quite dominant. You would not be the human Homo sapien, the intelligent man walking around that is 100 foot. Your brain alone will need to consume hundreds of thousands of calories a day. It's not going to happen. Yeah, there is this, obviously the Islamic culture is slightly different. It's, well, very similar to maybe the Christianity in its dark ages. Now, I think because we're the younger of the brother Karamazov. I think we've got a lot to learn, or the Muslim world's got a lot to learn. Uh, so they've got a few centuries to reshape themselves. Whether it's going to happen or not, it's a bit difficult because the Islam has a certain nature that makes it a bit difficult to reform. Yeah, so which means not necessarily more intelligent, but we're kind of not sure, but they're not here with us today. That's one thing we're sure of. They must have not been that successful. Yeah, they must have had issues. But when you think about it, why do you need to kill people anymore? I mean, think about it. Why do you want to kill resources? These are assets. What you want to do instead of killing is for the idiots. Killing is for the barbaric. What you want to do is you want to enslave them. And you don't want to enslave them through the old-fashioned way. So we've discovered that long time ago with the slave trade. So instead of killing people, we just use them as servants. Obviously, we've abolished that. It's no longer ethical, but we do it in some other ways. So completely control them and invade them through cultural influences. Why do you want to kill resources? Humans are resources, human resource. So instead of killing people, make them work for you. Make them buy your products. Make them consume your culture. Make them advertise your ideas. So yeah, I think we've evolved to something even more cruel. Because when you kill somebody, they're dead, they're finished, they're done. But you can actually have somebody emptied out from their uniqueness and make them become a shadow of themselves, just following orders and basically create zombies and robots that will work for you. and not being called slavery. This is the tricky part. So being seen to do the right things, yet have slaves of your own. Welcome to the new world order. This is quite interesting. We might be that artificial intelligence. I still think the simulation hypothesis is up there. I think we'll do a full episode about it one day. Um, uh, what's his name? The Swedish philosopher who postulated the simulation hypothesis. I think Nickstrom, a Swedish philosopher. I need to Google his name quickly. I've done a full episode on him before. Uh, Nick Bostrom. Yeah, Nick Bostrom is a Swedish philosopher, and basically his idea it's one out of three. He's given it the simulation hypothesis to be accurate by the ratio of 33%. And I'll do the full calculations for you guys in one of the episodes coming. It's quite interesting. We could be living in that artificial intelligence. As a matter of fact, we could be one. We could be one, and we don't know it. And because if it's happening, we don't know it. Well, how is it any different from a divine God who's programmed you to do certain things and predestined you to, give you free will, yet you're controlled by the chemicals of your brains that you did not choose to have. It is possible, and we as I said, we'll do a full episode on it because I'm convinced it's quite plausible. And by the way, there's nothing supernatural because it's freaky to some people. It's what it suggests that it is us doing the simulation, not necessarily an alien species. It's us in the future running back the tape to find out its humble beginning. So it's reliving its history through the rewinding of the tape, and we are the rewinding of the tape. It's a bit of a mind fuck, to be honest, but I think it's quite fun. I think we'll run with that episode at some point. It will be quite interesting. Yes, I agree with that. But are we really slave to energy? Because kind of. You can't really operate without energy. That's the whole idea. You've evolved, and that's the difference between inanimate and animate. Mrs. Grin, which is an acronym, it's a 7 letters acronym for a living organism. These are the 7 features that a living organism must have to be called a living thing, and that's what differentiates us from the inanimate to the animate. And one of them is being able to consume energy. Otherwise, you're not a living thing, unless you're a panpsychist who believe that even rocks and stones have a life of their own. The hypothesis of which can be disproved nor proved. It's just difficult. But at least you're gonna watch for behavior, and rocks don't express behavior. So we have to postulate that they are not a living thing and therefore not conscious, at least for the time being. But energy you can't do anything with that energy. You get depleted, you die. Seems to be the biggest drive. That's why it doesn't matter how intelligent we are, it doesn't matter how smart we are, we all don't help the temptation of what are we going to have for lunch today? Or what is for dinner tonight? Oh, I'm really feeling like fried chicken, whatever. We are there. It's there. It's been masked by taste buds and appetites and flavors and cuisines to mask that very, very important factor of our life, that without energy we'll deplete and die. So morals are just there to make that possible, I think. But it got a little bit more complex. So it does a little bit more than just searching for food. But at least that's how it started, in my opinion. Yes, yes, I completely agree. And the wise person would actually then sort of zone in and focus on the one that is more relevant to us right now. So if you're an individual, you don't want to be completely disjointed thinking about millions of things. You want to probably focus on the things that will at least are immediate threat or immediate benefit to you. But collectively, I think we do the same thing as well. I think we should do that. That's why a lot of people would go, "Oh, do we really need to spend that much money going to space?" It seems to be like a bit superfluous. Like we might have some more pressing issues to worry about. Um, it's debatable, because maybe going to space could be the one that could help humanity continue beyond the age of our blue planet. If it's even worth saving, I'm not sure if this is still the case. Uh, I'm going to wrap things up, guys, in the next 5 minutes. So I just want to summarize to those who just arrived recently. We've I'm just hoping if anybody arrived recently, I just urge you to watch the episode from the beginning, because I have posited today that the morality has evolved from the humble search for energy, aka food, and that consciousness, which is going to be covered in part 2 of these series, is very similar. I think consciousness has also evolved in search for energy or food. These series I'm going to be running for some time, and it's going to cover beyond these 2 points, but it is going to be designed, it's got the one theme in mind. We're going to take debatable areas and we're going to try to dissect them and see if they can be explained away through very simple steps without having to deposit a more complex and more ambiguous entity such as God. Because what you do is, if you explain anything through something that it needs its own explanation, all what you're doing is just postponing the inevitable, which is basically, I don't know. But Occam Razor would sort of urge you to, if you can explain away a problem with the least amount of steps, that's most probably is going to be the correct way that this has happened. By adding superfluous propositions that you take away and you still have the same problem intact, doesn't add anything. Or what it does, you're just postponing the or deferring the issue to another entity that is responsible of everything that cannot be explained, because you think the designer of a complex system ought to be as complex or more complex than the system itself. So it will need even a more rigorous explanation to be understood. So there is no point, especially when you add to this entity that's chosen to hide. Another episode that we want to cover. We want to cover, to me, the strongest argument for the probability that a God does not exist, which is the divine hiddenness. I think it's stronger than the problem of evil, because that God is choosing to hide for some strange reason. And in the next episode, which is next weekend, I'm going to be covering the second part of this, which is the evolution of consciousness and how I would relate it again to the search for food or energy. I'd like to thank everyone who sort of joined us today. You guys have been wonderful. I'd like to thank all who sort of donated to the chat. I think this sort of thing will keep me producing more content for in English. I've stopped my Arabic content now, so I'm going to fully focus on my English content. The Arabic content has been problematic for me. Um, uh, it's uh, it's a language that I haven't spoken for close to 30 years, and I find myself express my opinions and my thoughts are a lot more clear in English. So I'm going to continue that way. Plus, the quality of the chat and the quality of the opinions in the chat is completely different, and I have grown frustrated with that side of the world where things are a little bit difficult for me to comprehend. I think I have gone through speciations. I've drifted away for such long time that I don't find myself comfortable in amidst the Arabic speaking folks. Yet my uh, conversations are always subtitled in different languages, including Arabic. So those who would still want to follow my work, it will be available in Arabic as well through the subtitle in YouTube. I'd like to thank you all, and I'll see you next week. By the way, next week I'm going to have an interesting conversation with Dr. Robert Price, and we covered Judas Iscariot. We're taking fringe characters from the Bible, and we're going to shed the light on them. And we're going to talk about Mary Magdalene next week. One that has caused a lot of issues. Was she a lover of Christ? Have they gone to Paris or France, according to the Da Vinci Code, and married and have children? And they have something called the rose line, or the sangre royal, which means the royal blood. And should be a divine blood, shouldn't be a royal. When I think about it, he's not just a king; he's a god. So it should be the divine blood, not the royal blood. Anyway, this is an episode we're going to be covering next week, along with the evolution of consciousness. And I'm going to get into science because I feel that there is an appetite for science. I'm going to cover some cosmology, some biology, bits and pieces of everything, and hopefully enjoy the series. And for now, I'd like to say to you, enjoy the rest of your weekend.